I'm Sarah Niblack from Spark Practice, and I am so excited to be here with you today to talk about how we can use our language to make practicing, performing, learning, teaching, sharing, talking, all those things about music a little bit easier. So I find that often we have really confusing vocabulary when it comes to really talking about music. Then also we have another problem, which is that some things that we talk about when it comes to practice and performance are heavily stigmatized and are sort of bad words, like performance or audition. All of these things really add up. And so what I would like to suggest and what I'm really looking forward to in what we're doing today is to present kind of a way that maybe we can have a little bit more shared vocabulary and how that applies to what we do in the classroom, but also what our students are then doing in the practice room and how that translates to the stage. One of the major problems of not having a similar vocabulary is confusing ideas. So this might be expressed back to you in students who come back and they say, well, I didn't really practice that because I wasn't sure exactly what I was supposed to practice, or I wasn't sure exactly what you meant when blah, blah, blah. Sometimes we find ourselves looking for the right way to phrase something, the right words, exactly how to communicate an idea, and that our ideas and our capacities and our skills and everything we want to communicate to our students is actually getting received. So other ways that this shows up, sometimes we get really perplexing jury comments. Sometimes the way that we discuss performances or something we're working on in a lesson leads to a lot of confusion. What this also results in is having a lack of confident preparation. Because if people aren't really clear and we don't have a very easy way to talk about things that are destigmatized, then it makes it really hard to say, yes, I know this, I know that I got all of these things that are really clear and make a lot of sense. We want to minimize confusion and maximize music making, right? Here's another way to think about it. When we go to the theater or when you see a movie, you probably walk out of the show with a certain sort of experience about the show, right? And it could be, oh man, I really loved it. Everything was great. Or it could be, you know what? I feel like I liked a lot of it, but there was just, some of it was a little bit off. And until we know, like, was it the script? Was it the lighting? Was it the actor? Was it the costumes? Whatever, what made something really great or didn't quite fit, it's really hard to be able to understand our feelings about something and then also use that to bring up the whole experience. I argue that it's the same in music. So when we have a really clear understanding of what all of the different elements of music making are, then we're able to have a conversation that is a lot richer, that takes us a lot further. What are they? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. They are spark, sound, performance, attuned intonation, which, hold on for a second, hang with me there. This is intonation and harmony. So not only pitches, but how they fit into harmony, rhythm, and kinetic integration. Now, kinetic integration is where we're bringing everything together. This is our total choreography, but the super ninja part of this is that it's also our self-talk. So in these 5 elements, you can probably really identify quickly that there are 3 that we tend to talk about a lot, and 2 that either we don't know what it is or it's kind of a bad word, right? So when we talk about like, oh, well, what are the criteria in music? What are we aiming for? What? Say, I know this is pre-recorded, but come with me anyway. What would you suggest that they are? You're probably saying to your screen, rhythm, intonation, and a good sound, right? Even learning that changes lives. It's magical. It's wonderful. I totally agree. But then there are the other elements that we tend not to talk about as much, which actually make a huge difference when we bring them into the lesson space and also into the practice room, which are performance and kinetic integration. If we're talking about sound, we're talking about color, character, sound production, clarity, articulation, dynamics, the shape of sound, all of the different sorts of timbre and what we want this sound to be. When we invite a learner into that, regardless of what age we teach and what level we teach, when we start to invite a learner into the conversation about all of these different aspects of sound, it helps structure the conversation, but it also gives a lot of autonomy, and that invitation is really important for that artistic voice and developing musician in front of us, right? So when we talk about sound, we can go there. We can go into the technical things, into the artistic things, and into the performance elements like conception of character, how we're calling in the sound before we start playing, how we're putting together the body and the mind while we're doing that. Okay, performance. All right, this is one of my favorites. This is your mental game. These are the performance skills that you have to go from one end of a performance to the other. The absolutely most important thing to remember about practicing performance is that we're training ourselves and we're helping build this muscle in our brain to go between practice brain and performance brain. Now, what that means is that when we're in practice brain, that's the critical, analytical, curious detective. And performance brain is going to be that ideation, creation sort of flow state. And really building the ability and the strength of each of these different spaces, but then also to be able to switch from one to the other is a really essential element of being a great musician. So when we're talking about practicing performance and performance skills and building out our nervous system and all of that, what it really comes down to is building this ability to be able to switch between practice brain and performance brain. And if we haven't practiced performance before, we don't really know what those spaces feel like, and it's almost impossible to be able to just switch into performance brain and expect miracles. Now, performance, yes, I know a lot of people say this is something that we think about later, whatever, or we don't necessarily feel equipped to talk about. Let's just agree we're destigmatizing performance. There are so many skills that we can learn, just little skills along the way, to put this into practice and make sure that we're building our nervous system and we have that resilient courage. And little by little, we understand, and if we build this strategically, we really understand how to metabolize and hold space for bigger and bigger amounts of stress. Now, stress isn't inherently bad. We need stress to grow. But then there's a question of, are we building or are we breaking? So if we're thinking about performance and we're talking about it and we find a way to talk about it very early, then we're building and not breaking because we're really strategically introducing these things and again, building out our nervous system, developing those skills that we need to be able to enjoy being on stage and enjoy sharing the music that we want to share, even in high pressure or vulnerable situations. These are these little technical things that we can put into place. Like one of my favorites I'll share with you are trail markers. So in Spark Practice, we talk about trail markers, and trail markers are a little signal that we put in to our piece all over. It could be in excerpts, it could be etudes, it could be whatever you're working on. And usually they're before and after transitions and before and after, not necessarily whole sections, but little parts. And they're just kind of those little signposts that say, yes, you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing, this is great. There are 3 things that happen at a trail marker. One of them is that we forget everything that happened before, good or bad. We've all heard or had the experience of someone who we get to something that we're performing and it goes better than we thought it would. We're like, hey, nice. And then we totally mess up and face plant on something really easy just after it. Trail markers. The first thing is that we forget everything that happened before, good or bad. The second thing is that we reset our nervous system because we're no longer afraid of performance. We're no longer afraid of looking at building our nervous system and building our supportive self-talk. It can be positive, but it's more important to be supportive, right? Our supportive self-talk, because that's part of our vocabulary now, right? Letting our nervous system empty out is part of forgetting everything that happened before. So we don't have that sort of like drag of mistakes or little things creeping in, switching from performance brain back into practice brain, letting that critical mind come in again. And the third thing is that we absolutely recommit to the music making in front of us, which means just the next little bit between trail markers. The way that we can put this into practice is when we're starting a piece, we're looking for transitions, potentially tricky things, stuff that we are going to want to pay attention to. Then we can also use it when we're a little bit further along in the preparation process to work backwards. But when we're working backwards, no, we're not working backwards section by section. We're working trail marker by trail marker, which again are usually shorter. Before and after transitions, these are the things that get us through. We're building that bridge. So having a transition, not just the end of a section and the beginning of another section, but it's how does the music change? What's the story here? What's that bridge that takes us across? That's going to be really helpful. So that's one of the little kinds of performance skills that we can learn that's like a technical aspect of performance. But then we're also talking about an artistic aspect of performance. What is the story? What's happening here? What is the total picture that we want to portray? Then when we're talking about kind of the performance aspect of performance, then we're talking about really our mental game. This is our nervous system. This is, are we practicing visualizations? Are we using our lessons as performance opportunities? When we're talking about somebody else's performance, when we're reflecting back on that, then it's a question of, what did we notice about their performance? Is it something where somebody had a little mistake and they recovered really well? That's a performance thing. We need to be talking about that. Did somebody run through a piece and they're performing in a studio class or even in a lesson, and we can see that it took a couple lines to get into what they were doing, and then at a certain point they lost concentration. These are performance things that we need to be talking about, because then we have the tools to make sure that we can do that differently. For example, another one of my favorite performance techniques is to write 3 mood words on every piece or excerpt or section or even etude, so that we really can call that landscape, that picture, that backdrop, that movie set into our minds before we start playing. What goes with that is another performance skill that's kind of a technical thing, which is taking a little tiny reference point, maybe a measure or two, when we're really in the groove and we're like, I got this, I'm absolutely in it. We take that and we sing it to ourselves before we start playing. That takes a little while to get into it. Then when we're talking about, maybe I dropped off concentration here, that's when we're going to bring in skills like, Where are your trail markers? How do we anticipate? In Spark practice, I always say anticipation is mastery, right? So we're going to use that to our advantage and say, how do we prepare the part that we need to, where that concentration falls off, or where we get confused or distracted? In a visualization, is that part completely clear or not? These kinds of things. And when we talk about that, the whole part of performance becomes way less scary, and it's so much easier to build from the practice room to the lesson space to the stage. Yay! Okay, attuned intonation is, I know it's kind of a silly word, or a silly element to name this way. And at first I was a little bit confused because I was like, well, if I just say intonation, then the acronym of Spark doesn't work. But then the more that I thought about it, and the more that I dug into it, and the more that I dug into research, attuned made a lot of sense to me. More and more so, because when we're attuned to something, what are we doing? We're listening. And so when we're talking about intonation, intonation means, again, so many things, but we're talking about intonation where it fits into the harmony. Where are we coming from? Where are we going? It also means, which voice are we? What's happening here that we want to bring out? What's supporting? What is the texture? What's the orchestration? What's the role of this particular voice at this particular moment? Now, part of that is sound, of course, and all of these elements relate to each other, but we can identify these different 5 aspects of any performance, of any experience, even in the practice room, and then be better equipped with a vocabulary to know exactly what we're talking about. So if we're talking about this part of attuned intonation, intonation and harmony, part of that will be, does the person who's playing, does the learner know where they are in the harmony? What part of that is really important right now? How does that fit into the harmonic rhythm, which is another key aspect of music making in general, right? And one of my favorite strategies that I'll share with you in this session is just, it's one of the best parts of Spark practice, and it is super cheesy because I'm super cheesy, and it's called the skeleton. Now, the skeleton is, I know, prepare your groans, the backbone of the harmony. And this means that these are the notes that don't change. So this is the tonic, dominant, and subdominant in any key. Everything else is a feeling or expressive note that the intonation changes based on where we are in the chord, voice leading, all of that stuff. But if you really want to get kind of down to brass tacks, and you want to make sure that your intonation is completely in the pocket, the absolute best practice strategy for that is to record a phrase that the learner is working on, or that even you're working on. Please try it for yourself, but that the learner is working on. And then we don't listen back to it right away. We don't play any of those notes. You're only going to play out of the phrase the tonic, dominant, and subdominant, 1, 5, and 4. Even if those notes aren't in the phrase, we need to look at the score, we need to know what key we're in. We need to learn how to do that anyway, so let's start now. We're going to play the 1, 5, and 4. Everywhere you can find it on the instrument, all the different fingerings you can find, really just get those 3 notes into your ear, and we know really precisely like where we are in harmony at that point. Then, without playing any of the other notes, re-record that phrase. You're welcome. It's going to blow your mind. And any student that's struggling with intonation chronically, this was my case, any student that's struggling with intonation, if we get in the habit of doing the skeleton and we're talking about intonation functionally in terms of harmony and these ways to understand it, then it becomes so much easier for the learner to have so much more autonomy. They become really responsible for what they're doing. And it makes the conversation with us as teachers so much more fun, because then we can think about like, oh, well, the way this phrase is structured, where does it sit over the rhythm? What is the harmonic rhythm? Is it fast? Is it slow? All of those things. But also, are the important notes of the phrase on the big beats or on the weak beats? On the strong beats? On the slow, like weaker beats? So also, how are things moving? What's being held? What's being let go? And this really helps us understand phrasing through intonation, which once we get the hang of that is completely crazy. It's amazing, and it fixes a lot of problems. So, yay. Rhythm, but this isn't just note values. This is also what's the form, what's the structure, what's the groove, what kind of music is it? This is time signatures where we lean in, lean out, speed up or slow down to make a point or a transition or the end of a phrase. One of the most amazing things you can do is write a storyboard. Now, in the storyboard, you're going to start with rhythm, and you're just going to map out different sections of a piece. Learners who are doing this, all of a sudden, it helps with memorization, it helps with understanding what they're doing, it helps with basic pulse too, because they're like, okay, I know that here is where I'm expressing this music in a steady way, and here I'm speeding up or slowing down, but it's in these very specific places that I can see on a timeline, or I can write out in my part. This is also a question of what kind of music is it? Is it a happy dance? Is it a funeral march? What's actually happening in this scene? What's happening in the movie, for example? So just some of these basic things. And then in terms of tempo, when we understand what tempo is and what kind of music it is, and a little bit more of the structure, then everything becomes so much easier to fill in and make that really rich picture, that incredibly detailed story, that gorgeous music making that we really, really want. Rhythm is funny because if we think about like a classical symphony, it's really an episodic adventure in 4 different rhythmic parts. So we'll have a first movement that's a party. We have a second movement that is all the feels. We'll have a third movement that's a dance, and then we'll have a fourth movement that's a party again. When we think about it, this is really a rhythmic adventure. And so when we're looking at pieces and we're looking at etudes and we're looking at everything a learner is going to be touching and thinking about, then we really get into how to structure that, how they get to make decisions, what makes sense to them, what's tradition, and then the quality of our conversation just goes through the roof. Another thing to think about this, a lot of people that I've talked to, this is something that we know a lot, but it's not necessarily a thing that we teach the most, is that if somebody goes to a concert and maybe they're not a musician, or, maybe they are, and you're like, oh, what part did you like the best? Chances are, if they sing something back to you, the rhythm will be pretty much right and the pitch will be totally wrong. Which means to me that rhythm is really where everything starts. So this is a way to help us understand everything else that's happening and help us learn how to build out these different areas of our playing competencies while having this really deep connection with rhythm and what that means. Another little tip about a practice strategy that I love for rhythm is that I kind of have a thing about slow practice. I hate slow practice. I don't believe slow practice exists. I do believe that we stretch out time to be able to fit in more information before we've gotten to kinetic integration, while all of the information is a lot to think about and our brain gets sort of jammed up while we're trying to get all this information in before it becomes encoded, consolidated, chunked together, we can zoom out again. But when we're really zoomed in, there's so much information to get in there at the same time that we need to stretch out time. However, it's really helpful to keep the same kinds of gestures that we're going to want and the same kind of musical intention that we want when we put time back in its place and join the music that we want to make. So like the tempo that we're looking for, right? So one way to do this that I absolutely love is what in Spark practice we call the subdivision ninja. So the subdivision ninja is where we're going to take the smallest note value in the piece and we're going to play everything to that note value, which means that we're going to re-articulate. If a note is a quarter note and the smallest note value in the piece is a 16th note, for the quarter note, we're going to play a quarter note value, but as 16th notes. Da, 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 da. Okay? And this helps us do a couple things. It works magical superpower wonders for pulse. It cleans up pretty much anything that anybody's struggling with in terms of understanding where rhythm happens, what's an upbeat, what's not. All of that stuff becomes super clear. But then also we have the habit and we're building the circuit that we need. We're building the pathway, the neurological pathway that we need to be able to do things at tempo. So super magic trick. Rhythm is amazing. We can also use rhythm in sort of a traditional sense to clean other things with like sequences and patterns. And all of these things are really, really helpful, but understanding rhythm on a couple different levels helps us be able to discuss it in a way that for a learner makes a lot more sense and helps them be more autonomous. All right, kinetic integration. This is my favorite, and this is where a lot of people get stuck. Kinetic integration is so great because that's where things are starting to fit together and things are starting to work, and we're taking all of these tiny little incremental gestures and ideas and putting them, blocking them together. Little by little, those small chunks become larger chunks, become a whole package. Basically, a gesture. A whole piece, a whole performance will be a gesture. Now, that's some pretty sophisticated choreography. So when we're talking about kinetic integration, we're really talking about zooming in and zooming out on things that need a little bit more time to get everything into the brain at the same time. So we're avoiding those big blockages and end up getting frustrated, confused, learning something that's a little bit fuzzy around the edges. We want to have that possibility to go as far as we want. We can think about this kind of like learning to read, right? So first we start out with squiggles on a page. It sounds really silly, but when you open a book right now and it's just a bunch of squiggles, then we learn that those squiggles mean different letters. Then letters in different organizations mean words, then we understand meaning from those words, then we put those words together, we get a phrase or sentence, and that sentence then has meaning. It's the same in music, right? But also it's the same in how we learn. So when we're putting all of this different language together, having this idea of knowing that we can learn, knowing that we can strategically build different competencies together to make this whole picture is really important. And then we're equipped differently when we go in to work on our self-talk. We as teachers have the intimate experience of our own practice, performance, all of that stuff, all of the stuff that comes with that, which can be positive, negative, mixed bag, all the things, right? But Probably anecdotally, you know, if I'm working on a scale, da, 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 and there's something that doesn't work, da, 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 and I want to go da, 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 oh no, I did it again, da, 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 oh man, I'm never gonna get it right, da, 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 oh, I'm so stupid. Little by little, I'm developing a signature in that scale that anytime that shows up in my practice, pieces, performance, that signature is going to be there. Those are the things that we start to stress out about. Those are the things that we're convinced that we're going to get wrong. Those are the things that really create some of those blocks in our preparation, and also when we're afraid when we go on stage. Of course, all of these things fit together. And in kinetic integration, that's when we're really taking all of the other areas, so sound, performance, attuned intonation, rhythm, and helping build in supportive self-talk as we do that. And we're really strategically mixing them together, and then taking that a step further and making it harder than it actually is. That when we're in performance tempo and all of that, things are easy and make sense. Something that I really want to make sure we walk out of this with is an understanding that we can do a lot of work in a very short amount of time. One thing that we tend to do is if we start on the instrument, that we're building in the things that don't work in our playing, imposing those things on the music that we're learning. I suggest invite your learners to do it the other way. Let's use that corporal, whole brain, whole body system to learn what music we want to make, start to have feelings and opinions about it, explore dynamics with dance, for example. You know, put on a recording and sing and clap and dance around and make the faces of the music, and, you know, play with dynamics. If you're really piano, maybe be really small. And if it's forte, let's make our space really big. Not only when we move our body and we move it in ways that aren't necessarily with the instrument, are we getting our blood flowing, our brain is better oxygenated, we're learning on a deeper level, on a multifaceted level, in a different way, but we're also making sure that what we're learning is really the music that we want to make, exploring all of these different elements, but also making sure that we have that musical intention coming forward first, and then we figure it out with the instrument. These different kinds of things help us really build around what we're doing, and so that when we take it back to the instrument, then we can do things saying note names, or bow alone, or air alone. We can do taking out one hand and doing singing the voice that you want, and only playing, if you're a pianist, for example, only playing one hand, but making sure that you're really respecting how that one hand plays as if there were two hands. This is the same for strings with everybody. We'll also activate like the language center, the creation center, the making sound and word center. So having all the cylinders firing is going to give us that better total experience. All right, taking you through these different elements of Spark is such a pleasure for me, because inviting you into this kind of way of thinking a little bit differently, not being afraid of performance, bringing that into the practice room, bringing that into lessons every single time, learning a different aspect of performance, looking at sound and attuned intonation and rhythm slightly differently. All of these things, and when we bring it together with kinetic integration, we're learning how our whole body and our whole mind and all of our person, the technical, the artistic, and the performance elements, can all be expressive and autonomous and intentional, and really make it possible for us to be the music maker and the musician that we want to be. We're learning how to move from practice brain into performance brain. We're practicing letting the score tell us what's important right then, and putting that into the script that we're learning and chunking together through intentional kinetic integration. One of my favorite, and I'll leave you with this, one of my favorite analogies that I teach in Spark Practice is making a cake. So just think about it for a second. What is your favorite cake? Okay, now when you have an idea about that, think about the cake as a piece. All right, so my favorite cake is carrot cake. And let's say I want to play the Strauss Horn Concerto. And my Strauss Horn Concerto is carrot cake. Okay, it's my favorite. I love it. I want to get on stage and I want everybody in the room to have this amazing carrot cake. It's probably helpful in the practice room if I put in the ingredients in the right order and in the right way to make this carrot cake. And often we find ourselves putting ingredients for a different kind of cake into our mix in the practice room, and then being surprised and disappointed when we don't get the carrot cake of our dreams the day of the big concert or the big, audition or whatever. Having a common vocabulary of elements of music making, sound, performance, attuned intonation, rhythm, kinetic integration, which includes our self-talk, helps us really identify the ingredients that we want in the cake of our dreams. So please take that, play with it, tell me what you think. I'm super excited to hear back from you. Let me know what sticks with you, how you're bringing practicing performance and performance as an element into your learners' lives, how you're bringing kinetic integration to life for you, and also how your understanding and application of the other elements up levels. I'm really looking forward to it. So, as you know, you get out of your practice what you put in. Now we know exactly what we're putting in, and we're also building those skills like performance and intentionally multifaceted learning through kinetic integration to make sure that those connections are there and they're really strong and they're expressed absolutely through every part of our preparation, practice, and music making. Thank you so much for your time. To let you know, just for coming, you are going to get access to the Signature Spark Practice Plan PDF. Now, this will take you through an exercise to learn your signature Spark Practice Plan. So basically your favorite strategy in each of the 5 elements. And this is something I would love for you to share with me. Professors who have done this and teachers who have done this tend to share it with their students because it tends to be the checklist of things that they are telling their students anyway to do. But it's also a really interesting way to reflect back on how you love to practice and prepare for performances and all of that. It's a very easy exercise, but it goes a really long way. So I'm very happy to offer that to you. And for anybody who's in the VIP club, welcome. You are invited to the boosted level of that to actually have access to the mini course where we're going to spend some time together, and I'll take you through step by step how to build that, what it looks like, and how to bring it to life. Again, I'm Sarah from Spark Practice. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you in the practice room.